What's up everyone, I'm VenomousStare. This is going to be something I find very exciting, an old game. This is going to be a constant series that I'm going to be doing on my channel where not only do I cast games of Legacy of the Void that are current and do the build order guides and the new games and all the rest of it that I always normally do. Now I'm going to be taking a look at some old classic games, games that I think really deserve some extra attention, or games that happened so long ago where many people have forgotten about them. Now, the running title with the series is Venomous Classics, and usually these games are going to be throwback games that are either A, very good, B, had some sort of significant historical impact within the scene, or C, is a major turning point in a player's career. So these are kind of old classic games because oftentimes whenever the new expansion for StarCraft 2 comes out, people are playing the beta and they're excited to get their hands on the new content, and that's normal. But that also means that we don't really ever get a period to see what is the best and kind of take a look back at Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm and say, okay, well, these were the best games, these were the players to watch for, because the nature of a new game is there's always just this focus on moving forward. So what do I have here today? This is a game between two of my favorite players ever, IdrA, the infallible macro Zerg and probably the best foreigner of StarCraft Brood War, against Vibe, the American player from Colorado who gets featured on my channel all the time. He still currently streams, he's a great guy. But IdrA, his opponent here, if you don't know who this guy is, he's probably the most popular foreigner player ever. He is known for his bad manner and not necessarily disrespect, but this is the kind of guy who will always tell you what he thinks and not hold anything back. He's also known for his very good macro play. He rarely cheeses, and he has crisp, constant macro that he uses to crush his opponents. He's kind of known as like a robotic player who is always going to do the safe thing that he thinks gives him the ability to win in a straight up game. He's one of the best players you could ever learn from because he just grinds his opponents down with fundamentals and consistency. This tournament is BWC America 2012. Now, if you don't know what BWC is, it's basically WCS before WCS. And the way that it differed was there was more of a regional focus. The WCS, have Europe and America, and recently there's been somewhat of a region lock, but back in these days there was a hard region lock, and there was a series of regional tournaments like WCS America, WCS Sweden, WCS Canada, and then these tournaments, I'm not WCS, BWC, excuse me, and these tournaments led into a final BWC that allowed the top players from each country to go represent their country in a big super tournament similar to BlizzCon and similar to WCG back in Brood War, which was another tournament that we saw had players represent their region, their actual country, not just the Americas, Europe. And then they went to a big event where, of course, also South Korea was there, the best of the best Koreans. So you got to see the best foreigners versus the best Koreans. And this was in 2012 at the end of Wings of Liberty. And this was a time period that was generally considered to be Zerg favored. This was a time period that had a lot of Infestor play. As we can see, both IdrA and Vibe are teching up to the Infestor. And this is a best of 3 and it's 0-0, and yes, I will be doing the subsequent games. And this was a semi-final match. Whoever won this went on to play Scarlet in the finals. So a lot is on the line here. I think multiple thousands of dollars and whatever seed you would get in the big WCG, which happened in Shanghai, I believe, somewhere in China. So we can see that both players are going Roach and Fester. And if you're not familiar with this meta, basically the way it worked was Roaches don't cost a lot of gas, Ravagers didn't exist, so if you had 3 base saturation, and of course 6 geyser saturation, and you make a ton of Roaches, any Zerg player knows you're going to float gas if you do that. Obviously, if you can't use your excess gas on Ravagers. Nice denial of the 4th there by IdrA. So this of course means that you're going to have extra gas to spend, so infestors are perfect. Now, why do people make infestors? Why were infestors so good? Well, back in the day there was no projectile to infestors. So what do I mean? Now whenever you shoot a fungal growth, you see the little green blob moving, even if it's very quick. Before it was just instantaneous. Your army would just become completely fungal. There was no really time to react. Also, and probably more importantly, fungal growth did more damage. It actually did bonus damage to armored, which meant that it was much better against Protoss in general, because almost everything Protoss has is armored. But that also means it's good against roaches. Another thing that mass infestor play kind of granted was this thing that if you watched old Destiny VODs you're familiar with, and that's Zerg Force Field, which basically means that if you have infestors, obviously fungal growth prevents your opponent from moving, it's a snare. So that means that whenever your opponent moves at you with a big ground army, if you just do a wall of fungal growths, that will almost create a force field for your opponent, because a huge section of their army will be completely immobile and trapped. And the fungal growths trapping the army prevents the back part of the army from moving down and committing to a full engagement, similar to how Protoss force fields would prevent Zerg ground from ever achieving a full-on engagement. Now remember, this is Wings of Liberty, we're talking 2012 era, so we're not playing on Steps of War or Jungle Basin, because that's more 2010 type stuff. The game is pretty fleshed out at this point. People aren't just doing one base all-ins and trying to attack up ramps onto force fields. But Zerg is very powerful, and Blizzard has kind of said, well, we'll fix fungal with HOTS. And this led a lot of people to kind of have a disdain for the end of Wings of Liberty because of this focus on the infestor that a lot of people found to be unhealthy for the game. Both players are trying to tech into IdrA here, and IdrA is moving up to Vibe's 4th. Now, an interesting dynamic of ZVZ. Oh, actually, we're going to get an attack here pretty quick, it looks like. But, okay, here comes the attack. IdrA's going to swing down, and the top part of IdrA's army is going to get fungaled, but that's going to allow the meat and potatoes of his army to swing down from that huge ramp leading up to the 4th. And if we look at supply in the top right, IdrA is crushing Vibe. Look in the production tab. IdrA is the kind of guy who, even whenever he's attacking and microing, he's making more units. IdrA definitely has a focus on, well, the Zerg units are terrible, so I'm just going to continue to make them and outmass my opponent, as opposed to outthinking them or moving them around in a cute way. The way IdrA would beat his opponents, he would just kind of bludgeon them with his macro and wear them down and just brute force them. Often whenever Zerg had good late game army compositions, IdrA would become impatient and just try to win the game with Roach Hydra, because he didn't really like to favor these super turtly Broodlord styles like some Zergs. So IdrA's going to come in here with a ton of Roach Hydra, and Vibe's going to throw down some infested Terran, but IdrA has probably about the same amount of Roaches as Vibe and a ton of Hydras, which do a lot of damage. So Vibe is going to have to type out here. If you like these retro games, and Vibe knows, as he tries to rally out more Roaches, he GG's. So if you like this, subscribe for more.